Do you ever hear the word no when you're at IEP meetings? And what do? Do you ignore it or accept it and just move on? Or when you hear the word no, do you continue to argue and hope that you can convince the other person to change their mind? Do you say, okay, since you've denied my request, let me have a prior written notice? Those are all possibilities. But today we're going to be talking about how to get to yes when you're at IEP and ART meetings. So thanks for being here. If we haven't met before, I'm Charmaine Tanner. I'm a parent, a retired teacher. I'm also an author of a #1 best-selling book, The Gift, the Art of Advocacy. And my purpose in being here is to help all of us become better, effective advocates. I want you to be confident when you walk into that next IEP meeting. So we are here today to talk about how to get to yes when we're at IEP or ARD meetings. Now, you might remember last week, if you were with us, we talked about how to solve the people problems at meetings so we can stop this tug of war that sometimes happens. And we looked at the alternative to the tug of war game is based on the book Getting to Yes. And it's, in the marketing world, it's called Principled Negotiations. We looked at the people part of Principled Negotiations last week. Today, we're going to be talking about the difference between interests and positions. And then in future Facebook Live meetings, we'll be going into the options, how you create more options at meetings. And the fourth part is the criteria. How do you decide if this is going to be a good decision or not for your child? Last week, we talked about separating the people from the problem, putting aside our dislike for the individual people there, and instead concentrating on resolving the problem. One mantra that you can remind yourself is don't get mad, don't get even, but to get what your child needs. So how are we going to get to yes? That's going to be our goal today. And if you are watching us live or you are watching the replay, make sure to say hi so I know that you're here and we can have a conversation. It's a lot more fun when it's interactive, and it's a lot more meaningful for you when you can ask questions, when you can bring up situations, and we can use that as our discussion today. So if you are liking this, give us the thumbs up, or you can share it with others to make sure that your friends also get to get this information. So we're looking at how to get to yes. And I think one of the first things is we need to talk about perspective. And so I like this. It says, life is all about how we see things. So look at this picture. Are you seeing a side profile of the person? Are you seeing one side of the full view of the person? Or can you see both sides? So let us know. You can type it in the comments. But the purpose is for us to look at when we're sitting in IEP meetings that we know there are going to be different perspectives, right? Because we all come to that meeting with different background information. We come to that meeting with preconceived notions, with what's happened before in IEP meetings. So keeping that perspective and having the ability to be flexible in our thinking and looking at how the other person is seeing the situation can be very helpful. So Carla is saying both. Cool. Yeah, because that's going to help you, Carla, to be able to see other people's perspectives. And as much as we don't want to sometimes, I think that is really one of the first steps to getting to yes when we're at meetings. So let's keep going here. The big thing that we're going to focus on today is the difference between positions and interests. And there's an awesome short, I think it's like a 7-minute video on the Cadre website that I will come back and post the link to that really helps describe the difference between positions and interests. Oops, and I don't think I was showing that. Let me go back here. So the Cadre film, like I said, I'll give you the link for that. But to me, when I look at the differences between positions and interests, there's several different stories that are kind of, key examples that a lot of people use. So I'll share one of those with you. And, it's a family in the kitchen, and there's 2 young kids. There's one orange on the counter, and both kids want that same orange. And the mother is kind of beside herself because it's like she's tired of her kids arguing. But here they have the orange and they're like fighting back and forth. No, I want it. I want it. Well, the smart thing that the mother does is she talks to the kids and she tries to figure out why they want the orange. Now, you may think like, Charmaine, that's like crazy. They both want it because they both want to eat the orange. But that's an assumption that we make. And after the mom has talked with the 2 kids, she finds out one of the child does want to eat, the inside of the orange, but the other child wants to try this new recipe and she just needs the orange rind. So instead of cutting the orange in half and nobody's happy, the mom has chosen to dig deeper and figure out what her kids really want and how to do that. So an easy solution is the first person gets to use the rind, grate that off, and the second child gets to eat what's inside the orange. Now, this may be like, well, that's great, but how does this apply to IEP meetings? Well, so many times when we're in IEP meetings, we come with preconceived notions. We come with a position that we're going to take. Like, I'm not leaving that meeting until I get a one-on-one paraprofessional for my child. And the staff may be coming to that meeting saying, this mom is never happy with anything we do. I bet anything she's going to bring up that one-on-one aid again. And we're not budging. This is not something we're going to budge on. Well, that is both of you arguing for your position and what you're thinking you want to have happen at the end of the meeting. So Raylene is also with us. Hey, Raylene. And Raylene's from California. So nice to see California represented. But this whole notion of positions and interests are like really crucial when you are trying to figure out how to get to yes at IEP meetings. So let's look at this a little bit more. So the positions are what people say they want. So it's kind of those demands that people are making, or this is like where I'm going to stake my flag and I'm not going to budge. And what you need to be able to do before you go to the IEP or the ARD meeting is you need to really look inside yourself and say, what are my positions? What is like the biggest thing that is important to me? And usually when we do that, we come up with position statements like, I want my child fully included, or I want my child to have a one-on-one para, or I want my child to have more speech, support, more speech therapy time during the week. Those are positions. So you want to identify what your positions are before you go to the meeting, but you also want to be thinking about what are the other people's positions that are at that meeting. And spending some time to figure out what they're thinking about is a great way to be prepared for your next meeting. Now, opposite of positions are interests. And the interests are those underlying things or underlying reasons for what people are saying they want. And again, before you go to the meeting, you want to try to look beneath that iceberg, because the interests lie beneath. The positions are pretty readily, seen and you can recognize. But the interests are what we need to get to, because that's going to help us get to yes. So one of the things that you can do when you're trying to figure out your interests is, why do you want what you're asking for? And if we go back to the example of a parent that wants a one-on-one paraprofessional, one of the first things that I'll talk about with the parent as an advocate is to say, okay, so I understand that you really want the school district to pay for a one-on-one para. Now let's talk about that a little bit. And I asked questions to try to figure out why they're asking for that para. I want to know, is it a safety reason? Is it an academic reason that the para is going to be in the classroom helping them? Is it that maybe an adult needs to help facilitate friendships, and so they want that extra adult to be around their child? Because depending on what your interests are, that's going to show where you want to go in that meeting. Because just demanding things and sticking with positions, you're going to keep running up against that no. If you look underneath, not only what your positions are, but also what the staff's positions are, or what their interests are underlying their positions, that's going to help you get to yes. So let me know if this is making sense to you. And if you can think of an example where you were talking about something in a meeting, or you were requesting something and you heard that word no, what did you do about that? Or if you want to bring that up, type it in the comments and we can use that as our real life example as we keep going through our live show today. So again, it's, why are you asking for what you want? And we also want to take time to think, why do they want what they're asking for? So if we look at the example of the one-on-one para, maybe in this situation, the parent is saying, I really want that for my child. My child really needs a para, because when they go on the playground, they're not safe. The terrain is uneven. The wheelchair, we can hardly get it out there. We can't get it down to the actual parts on the playground to play. We need some extra help for that. And that's why I want that para there. Well, let's look at what the district is saying, or the school team. Chances are they're going to say no when it comes to adding more staff, right? Well, no is their position, but what are their underlying interests? So type in the comments, what do you think might be some reasons that a district would say no to additional staff? And I'm going to get a sip of water here while you're doing that. So what do you think some reasons are that administrators would say no to getting a one-on-one para? I think a common thing that we think about is money, right? And money can't be brought up in IEP meetings as a reason why they're not going to, fulfill some request. However, part of that is going to be underlying their staunch position of not hiring additional staff. But what else? What else do you think? Why are they so stuck on not hiring a para? Well, one common thing is that they don't want to set a precedent, right? It's like, oh no, if we give this parent what she's asking for, then every other parent we have at IEP meetings is going to start asking for that same thing. So that can be an interest that they have underlying their position. No, we're going to keep control. Control is like very important to us. So what you see is you kind of get down to those basic needs that we have. And it's like, that's where we need to have the conversation. So Raylene says, yes, cost. And that for sure, I think, is kind of natural that administrators have budgets. And when somebody's asking for something that costs money, that's going to be one of their fears, right? And so we need to look at that, and we need to know before we go to the meeting, this is some of the resistance that we're going to get. But we need to know that we've got to keep going and kind of processing more and asking more questions and going deeper in order to really get to that yes for the meeting. So let's look at how we can do that. So one of the things is to make sure that you're asking clarifying questions. And this is, I think, I don't know. For me, it's something that I'm still working on because I can be like any other human being. And it's like, you have that tendency just to kind of state your case and make an argument and bring up more evidence of why you're right. And that just gets us to banging our heads together. And that's not going to get to yes. So one of the things I always remind myself and remind other parents is to ask questions. And I love this because this is a little thing I bought at a office store on the clearance aisle. And it's and they kind of come apart, but it's Post-it notes. But if I lay this out in front of me at IEP meetings, it's a visual reminder that I need to ask more questions. I need to really understand what they're saying. And so this is great because it's a reminder, but it's also a place that, as you're hearing things or before you go to the meeting, these are some questions that you're going to ask. So let's look at some examples of questions. And Raylene, thanks. She says, yes, that they think it's too restrictive. And this is an argument that's been, I don't know, just I think in the past few years has come up more and more. And I really think it's come from a training that a lot of administrators buy into and attend conferences. And one of the big things that they're starting to say is, an aid is really more restrictive than not having an aid. And so let's use this as our example when we go on. So when you hear, oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Brown, but, or Mrs. Dixon, we can't, it just wouldn't be wise. It really is more restrictive. So then as a parent, what would be some clarifying questions that you could ask so you keep the conversation going versus getting to this standstill and keep hearing the word no? So let's look at some examples of those clarifying questions that we could ask. One question that you could ask is, what would it take to? And then, so in this case, it would be, what would it take to hire an additional, adult to help in my child's classroom? What would it take? And the good thing is, with a lot of these, you can make sure that you ask the question, but you pause and you wait for them to answer. Because so many times what I've noticed with parents and meetings is they'll ask a question and then they'll either answer it themselves or they'll just kind of go on to the next topic. And it's like, no, when you ask a question, pause and wait for some responses and look around the room. Look at the people in the eye. Look and expect that they're going to have a response. So, sometimes it's like they just kind of sit there and I let that wait time happen. And it may feel uncomfortable, but we're asking questions that we want to use as conversation starters, and we want to ask these questions to use to figure out what those underlying interests are. Because when you hear that it's too restrictive to have an aid, I think that's this automatic response that they've been taught to say. But I don't think they really understand that. So we want to remember that we're going to ask more of these clarifying questions. So another one is, can you help me understand where you're coming from? So you want to give them the chance to explain why they think an aid is going to be too restrictive. And this is going to help you know how to respond. So instead of assuming, we want to give them a chance to clarify. So if they say, well, having an aide sitting next to your child, all day in the general ed class, that is like really restrictive. The child's not going to be listening to the teacher. Your child's not going to be forming friendships with other kids when there's this adult with them. And if that's one of the things that they say to clarify where they're coming from, then that's perfect, because you now have an opportunity to agree with them. And how many times does that happen in meetings where we can agree with what the staff is saying? And you say, that is perfect because I felt that same way. I don't want the aide sitting next to my child all day in the general ed classroom, because you're right. I want my child listening to the teacher. I don't want that aide preventing my child from, forming friendships with the other kids. You're right. I don't want that either. So that's great. That's something we both agree on. And really point out every time you have, shared something that's a common ground, or, that's something that you both agree on. So now you've kind of taken away the, that kind of presence that their argument has, because you've agreed with it. So now we keep going, though. We want to keep digging a little bit deeper. So what else can we ask? You can ask, how will that suggestion be helpful? So this is if they've offered a suggestion. So let's go to the example of, you've heard that an aid is too restrictive, and that's why they're not going to, hire an additional person. So instead, you could ask another question, and you could say, well, let's look at what the real reason is that we think an additional adult is going to be helpful. We think it's going to be helpful because we could look at the research-based practice of co-teaching and how that is such an effective way to make sure that kids are effectively included in general ed classrooms. So I'm glad you brought, and you could say to them, I'm glad you brought up the restrictive part because I totally agree with you. So instead, we don't want to create that picture of somebody being Velcro to my child. Instead, the picture I have in my mind for why I want to see another adult in the classroom is because I want to see co-teaching happening. I want to see that there are ways that we can approach things in a variety of ways, that it's not just one teacher lecturing, but it's another adult in the classroom that's making that lesson more multisensory. So that's the picture that I have. So right there, you have helped them clarify what your position is. It's not, you don't want that restrictive aid Velcro to your child, just like they don't. And your picture is you have two adults in the classroom helping your child and actually helping all the kids benefit from having this more inclusive way of having children educated in the building, right? So if this is something that you're finding, makes sense to you, and you would love to make sure that there's other parents that you know about this, just hit the share button. Share it on your personal page or share it in groups that you are in, because the more people that we can get to understand these concepts, the more our kids are going to be included, the more our kids are going to be successful when they're at school. So I would love for you to share it or give us some likes and love if this is making sense. So Raylene, let me know if this is helping, because I think your example is really important and it's a real life example. So I hope as we're talking through this that you're seeing some other alternatives of things that you can say, questions that you can ask. So they've talked about how restrictive it is. You've clarified and said, actually, I'm really looking, the picture to me is more of a co-teaching model. And so then you actually are looking at, maybe it isn't the aid that I need. Maybe it's not, that we're going to hire this additional person, but maybe it's how do we use our staff in other ways. So instead of having a teacher kind of stuck in the resource room down the end of the hall, how can we free up some of that resource teacher's time so that person can come into the general ed classroom and help co-teach and help facilitate learning? So do you see, it's like we switch it. It's not that the aid is what's most important. What's most important, what our underlying interests are, is that our kid is going to be learning academic skills where they're in the classroom. And our picture of how that's going to happen is having another adult in the room. It doesn't have to be an aide. It can be somebody that's already on staff. Sometimes it can be a Title I reading teacher that goes into the classroom and co-teaches. So those are the things, these are the possibilities that start coming up once you are trying to get to those underlying interests, so you can get to a yes and you can get agreement on how you can make this happen. So Holly's with this. Hey, Holly. She says that she really likes the idea of a co-teaching model. Yes. And just to put in a plug for co-teaching models a little bit further, July 26th, the end of the month, the last Thursday of the month, Paula Cluth and Julie Costin are both going to be on, and they're going to be talking about the co-teaching model. So Make sure you put July 26th on your calendar, because that's going to be an awesome show all about co-teaching. And, sometimes I think parents might think like, Charmaine, why are you telling us all this stuff about, things that teachers need to know? This isn't, what parents get involved in. But I think as parents, we need to have some basic knowledge, some basic information about what makes inclusion work, in order for us to have ideas that we can suggest at the IEP meetings. So Raylene says, I need to get better about asking the clarifying questions. I think that will help everybody get on the same page. And Raylene, I'm right with you. I mean, I have to make that kind of a conscious thing before I go into meetings, because I was a debater in high school. So part of my natural tendency is just to start debating with people. And I have to step back, and I have to realize that that's not going to get us as far as if I use things like asking clarifying questions. So that's why, you can get some little visual that you put down in front of you when you're at meetings. So visually, it reminds you, what kind of clarifying question could I ask for, or could I ask at this time? So let's look at some other ones here. Here's another great one. It's, what benefits can we expect if we did that? So when we're using the example of, now we've figured out it's not necessarily a para that we want in the classroom, but what we really want is, we want to look at the school changing how they service kids, and we want to explore that co-teaching model. And we can look at what would be some of the benefits. Now, this is where, you can pull out some research-based articles. I'm not sure at the IEP meeting is the best time to do that, because people really aren't going to sit there and read that. You can point out some highlights of research-based articles about the benefits of co-teaching or the benefits of inclusion, and say, if you'd love to read more about that, I've got some copies of articles I can share with you. But you want to explore what would be the positives. So if we look at co-teaching, if we look at having our kids successfully included, we know probably from a lot of, things that we've learned ourselves about inclusion, is that it benefits all the kids in the class, not just the student with the disability. It makes teachers become better teachers when they have to start looking at, what other ways can I explain this so I make sure that all my kids understand it? Or what are other ways that I can help this child show me what they've learned, besides just writing a 5-page essay about it? Or it helps teachers start to think about, how am I going to get this kid engaged and motivated? And when they're thinking about that one child, guess what? The ideas they come up with are going to help, because they can encourage all their kids in their class to be more motivated and engaged, because the teacher's now going to start looking at what their interests are and bringing in things like that. So co-teaching, the principles of universal design for learning, are all things that will make the teacher better. And then I think the thing is, we look at, it's not just this one teacher teaching the class that your child's in, but what can that principal do so their whole building starts embracing other ways to work with kids? So you start getting people kind of percolating with ideas. And the next time we talk about getting to yes at IEP meetings, we're going to talk about how you can start really generating more options and more ideas, because that's really important at IEP meetings too. So let's keep going here, and we'll look at the interest. And we've been talking about, this is what people say they want. And we need to look at why they're saying that, right? Oops, I don't know why we're going back here. It seems like I should be past these, right? Because the final outcome that we want to achieve is our kids excited, enthusiastic, successful, having relationships, having friendships, and learning more at school. And when we get to more yeses during IEP meetings, this is the outcome that we're going to have. So this is the exciting part, because we finally get to, instead of arguing during IEP meetings, we ask those clarifying questions that helps you get to yes, that helps you figure out what those underlying interests are. And it dissolves that, like, I'm going to go marching into that meeting and this is what I'm going to demand, and I'm not going to settle for anything less. And instead it's like, I was always thinking I needed a para, but guess what? Yeah, there's ways that special ed teacher could do some collaborative planning. So there are other ways that we can reach that really big goal that you have. And that's why I want you to spend time to think about what those underlying interests are that you have. Why are you asking for this? What would this look like for you? So clarifying questions can be helpful for you to ask during an IEP meeting, but clarifying questions can be helpful for us before we even go into that IEP meeting. We have to identify what we really are picturing, and then we need to bring that to the table. So let me know if this has been helpful. If you have any other questions or comments, type them in the comments and we can address those, because yeah, it's really important. It makes a huge difference. Just employing, using that strategy of clarifying questions. And one of the books that I showed you last week is this book from Nicholas Martin. And I always have to turn it. So this is a guide to collaboration for IEP teams. And this is a really good book. And I'm sure you could just check it out from your library, because, books can get expensive when we keep adding more books to our library. And this book is really written, I think, more for school people and more for like facilitators of IEP meetings. But again, I think, a strength that I bring to the advocacy world is my past teaching experience. And I want to use that. I want to tap into some strategies that are being taught to teachers and administrators, because that's going to help me as a parent. That's going to help me as an advocate be even more effective at IEP meetings. So I encourage you to check that out. Of course, I would have to say also the Art of Advocacy book that I wrote, A Parent's Guide to a Collaborative IEP Process, is also a good book that you can have in your library. So let me know. Hallie says that this has been good information. And she says, thank you. And Jessica's with us and she's giving us a thumbs up too. So thank you, Jessica. Next week is a time where we're going to be having a guest on our show. And it's an advocate from Virginia, Cheryl Poe. And she just submitted a systemic complaint against the Virginia Beach City Public Schools. And there are 9 parents in this named complaint. So it's really kind of exciting what can happen when a group of parents get together. So I really encourage you to stay tuned next Thursday at noon Mountain Time to hear Cheryl Poe. She'll be talking about how she got a group of parents together and help them write the systemic complaint. And it's gotten national news attention, so it's going to be a great hot topic for us to talk about next week. The other upcoming shows I want to tell you about is July 26th, Paula Kluth, who's this awesome expert on working with autistic kids and also inclusion, and Julie Costin, who's been a previous guest on our show, are going to be both with us on July 26th to talk about co-teaching. August 2nd is another show that you want to write down to be at, because I'm going to be talking to the author of a new release book, Differently Wired Kids, and she's going to be with us too. So we have a great schedule lined up for our next Facebook Live shows. I encourage you to come back, and Talia says, looking forward to that she's heard about her. So yeah, Paula Kluth, I don't know if you're talking about her or Debbie, who wrote the Differently Wired child book. All of these guests are going to be super, super, super. So I hope you guys encourage your friends. The more we get parents educated and learning more about effective techniques for advocacy, the better we're going to make change. And not just change for our kid, but we're going to be making more systemic change, which is really what we need to be looking at. So I'm excited that you are on this journey with me. I'm Charmaine Tanner. I am here to help all of us become better advocates. And I look forward to seeing you next Thursday at noon Mountain Time. Until then, take care, everybody. Bye bye.